Let's turn now to Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech marking the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party this week. The speech all but killed off the idea that China, under its current leadership, will ever liberalise. Instead, the speech pointed to an even more controlling Communist Party. Let's bring in now the Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Peter Jennings. Peter, it's great to see you again. Xi Jinping has hit out at perceived bullies in his speech. How aggressive did you find it? And what did it say about how China intends to position itself globally?
Well, particularly in China, I think all politics is local, and certainly Xi Jinping's prime audience for this is 1.4 billion Chinese people. And his message to them is that there is no future for China without it being run by the Chinese Communist Party. And there's no future for the Chinese Communist Party without it being run by Xi Jinping. That's the underlying message. And the sense of toughness, the references to bullying, that we're not going to let ourselves be pushed around by the international community, I think is an attempt to stoke domestic nationalism inside China, to sort of rally around the party. Frankly, I can't see a country at the moment which is seeking to bully China. It's all on the other direction. China is the big international bully at the moment. But this is an attempt to position himself and the Communist Party as the permanent leaders of China and to make the Chinese population rally around a fictional threat, which is the bullying behaviour of foreign countries.
I mean, you're so right about that, Peter. The international community was barely prepared to even stand up and say, hey, there should be an investigation into the origins of COVID. People have been too scared to even properly ask China what happened. You know, there's been no formal démarche. It's just absurd. Let's have a quick look at that grab from Xi Jinping this week.
The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress, or enslave them. Anyone trying to do so will most certainly face bloodshed in front of a great wall of steel built by more than 1.4 billion Chinese.
Peter, this so-called, celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party took place in Tiananmen Square. What message was China sending by holding the event on this site?
Well, it has massive symbolic importance. I think for people outside of China, perhaps the first thought is the killing of Chinese students in and around Tiananmen Square 30 or so years ago. But for average Chinese who have not been allowed to learn about the Tiananmen Square massacre, what you have there is the traditional seat of power of the Chinese state going back centuries. When Xi Jinping was speaking, he's actually looking down the length of the square towards the mausoleum of Mao Zedong at the other end of the square. So this is an expression of power. And in particular, it's an expression now of Xi Jinping's sole personal authority as he stands above that painting of Chairman Mao. He's basically saying that China is going to remain a one-party state indefinitely, and he's going to be the leader of that one-party state.
There's something that's been raised with me as I've interviewed foreign experts while I've been writing my book, which is that since Tiananmen Square, the accusations around a potential laboratory leak in Wuhan in China, an accident that was mishandled and led to a global pandemic, is the first, event that has truly put China under a great deal of international pressure since Tiananmen Square. Some people suggest to me that this could potentially even see a leadership overthrow or a challenge to Xi Jinping in the next 4 or 5 years if it's not handled, if the handling of it isn't improved. What do you think the possibility of this is?
Well, I think that that's Xi Jinping's number one concern at all times, is whether or not the party can remain in control of the people. And certainly he got the shock of his life about a year ago when across Chinese social media, in the very early stages of the virus, there was criticism being directed at him and the Politburo in Beijing for their failure to handle the early stages of the crisis. That then led to the crackdown that we've seen and the subsequent arrival of aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy designed to try and shut down international criticism. What I'd say about Xi is that he has strengthened the internal security apparatus of China to such an extent that it's difficult to see opposition being built to him really at any time in the next 5 years. He's 68, he's quite healthy, and I think he fully intends to be there for a good long time to come. So perhaps not within 5 years, Sharri, although I just wouldn't underestimate the ability for the Chinese people to mobilise if they find themselves angry enough. The question will be that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party will try to direct that anger to a false enemy, which is these so-called overseas bullies. And again, all of this is really about just keeping him personally in power.
Yeah. Look, finally, Peter, what we've been witnessing with Hong Kong is just so heartbreaking and terrifying. You know, journalists and editors being arrested at the airport as they're trying to flee. There's been a lot of speculation about whether or not the US and Australia and other allies would intervene if China made an attempt of reunification with Taiwan. What's your view? Do you think we would? And do you think, you know, the US and Australia should intervene in Taiwan if something did occur?
I think Taiwan is going to be a red line for the United States. Joe Biden was around when Barack Obama was president, and they collectively made a mistake to not push back against China's militarisation of the South China Sea. Hong Kong, I think everyone, most particularly the Taiwanese, were conscious of what it means to find yourself being taken from being a relatively open city to being put directly under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. And so for the international community, Taiwan becomes a critical test case. If Biden is not prepared to strongly stand up for the defence of Taiwan as a democracy of 24 million people, the first question we should be asking ourselves in Australia, Sharri, is what hope do we have as a democracy of 25 million people, perhaps not quite as strategically significant to the United States as Taiwan is. So I think this is a moment when the democracies have to rally together and protect the interests of other democracies. And clearly the test case over the next 5 to 10 years, I think, will be how we engage Taiwan to protect their interests and to reduce the chances of a disastrous Chinese Communist Party miscalculation.
Yeah. Peter Jennings, thank you very much for your time this evening. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sharri. Thank you.